For the last 3 days, a temporary ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has held up after a 4-week bombing campaign against the Gaza Strip by Israeli Defense Forces called Operation Protective Edge. The campaign has taken the lives of 1,867 Palestinians, 3 Israeli civilians, and 64 IDF soldiers, according to Gaza and Israeli officials at the time of this broadcast. But beyond the devastating human toll, much of the already weak infrastructure of Gaza has been left in ruins, with UN sources estimating that the destruction could be as much as $5 billion and will take decades to rebuild. So to get a sense of what it's like on the ground, I wanted to talk to someone in Gaza. So earlier I spoke with Dr. Belal Dabour, a physician at Gaza City's Al-Shifa Hospital. I started by asking him to describe the destruction.
Here in Gaza City and in Gaza Strip, before even this aggression started, the situation was not pretty. We had more than 70,000 housing units missing. Now, after I took a tour around Gaza, and I found that not a single street has not been scarred by some form of damage from the Israeli attacks. We have, by average numbers, around 10,000 homes that are completely destroyed or partially, but are uninhabitable now, in addition to other thousands that are partially destroyed but inhabitable, but will not be able to rebuild.
One of your former university, which was obliterated, and the other of a before and after image of El Wafa Hospital. Talk about the amount of civilian targets that have been bombed just in the last month.
Well, if you want to talk in numbers, we can mention 4 major hospitals that were out of service now as a result of the damages. We can talk of 13 health centers, more than 7 UNRWA schools, a university, a community college, about 10,000 homes, 17 major factories, each one of them used to employ hundreds of workers. We're talking about streets connecting cities together that are now not working, uprooted by the bulldozers of the Israeli army. And of course, let's not forget the power plant that used to supply 40% of the Gaza Strip's needs of electricity, and now it's all gone.
The definition of human shield is the deliberate placement of non-combatants in or around combat targets to deter the enemy from attacking, as well as literally shielding combatants during attacks. We've seen rockets being shot near civilian areas, as well as plenty of infographics from the IDF showing literal shielding of missiles with civilians. But Belal, have you seen any evidence backing up that claim?
I have not seen myself, but I've seen the infographics from the Israeli Army official account on Twitter, and let's just say that infographics are not proof. Anyone can draw them. I've seen some videos from the foreign press. Here's the problem with those videos. We are not talking about 2 armies fighting. Even the Palestinian militants, the fighters, they are regular men. They are regular adults fighting to protect their families. We are now people under incubation, and we are granted the right to protect ourselves from our oppressor. Even the armed resistance is allowed according to Article 51 of the United Nations. So when we exert our right, we are not to blame. The problem with media is that we are blamed for both the casualties on the Israeli side and for our own deaths. We are blamed for our 2,000 casualties and for the Israelis' 67 casualties, most of them soldiers. And this is not right. So we are exerting our right to protect ourselves. We are all civilians protecting ourselves. We should not be blamed for that. The videos that the press showed, first of all, this is not the situation. These are all isolated events, isolated accidents. And number 2, if we are not allowed to go on the opposite side of the border. Here in Gaza, the press is free to work as they desire. But if we go to the other side of the border, there is a gag order. There is a censor that prevents any photo from being showed on the internet or on TV. But the few photos that were leaked, they show Israeli children. They show families coming to the Israeli bases around Gaza, and just to chill out and watch as their army pummels Gaza's buildings and schools and hospitals with artillery and with their Air Force massive bombs.
Yeah, I've never really heard anything quite like it, Belal, saying that, 2 million people are committing self-genocide and not being called out for such outrageous statements here. You've been working, of course, out of Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. I know that the hospital is very limited, only 11 beds in its emergency room. What's the status there right now? How hard has it been to care for the influx of patients and victims?
The second Shia massacre happened when they hit the marketplace. 150 injuries arrived to the hospital in just 15 minutes. So patients were literally lying on the ground, on the floor, on the hospital floor, in the corridors, with some of them with their limbs lying beside them, some of them bleeding on the ground. 40 doctors and nurses could not manage all of the injuries. In one occasion, one guy was arrested. His heart stopped working, and because we are short on staff, we have 150 people all on the ground. We had to let him die. His heart stopped working. He received at all. We had to let him die and shift out the next patient who might have a slight chance of surviving. So a hospital who is dedicated to serving 500,000 people is used to receiving one or two injuries, for example. We can deal with one or two injuries every 15 minutes, but we cannot deal with 150 injuries in 15 minutes. And that's, unfortunately, a lot of lives were lost due to these attacks, especially when it is artillery hitting a wide area with a lot of houses in it.
Doctor, I can't imagine the choices that had to be made with who you needed to help the most and seeing so much death around you. It's extremely tragic. And I mean, we're just talking about the people who have been lost and traumatically injured. Let's talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, according to the UN Relief and Works Agency. After the 2012 war, which paled in comparison to the recent operation, the rate of PTSD in children more than doubled. Talk about the lasting effects that will be on children growing up in the wake of this devastation.
During this month, if you had a survey and you ask people who of them have either heard an explosion, being exposed to an explosion, or seen some of their loved ones die or get injured, you will find that 100% of the population of Gaza has been subjected to such massively stressing experiences. And not just once. They have been repeatedly going through such experience every day for 30 days. And you can imagine the amount of psychological and physical stress that the whole population had to go through. I myself have not had a decent sleep for more than 1 month. The longest that I have slept is just 3 hours before being interrupted with a massive airstrike nearby in my street, and not being interrupted by the faraway airstrikes. We've got accustomed to it. That's just myself. Imagine about the children. Imagine the children who had to witness their parents living in fear. A child's model is his father or his mother, and you have to see your father or your mother in fear, unable to protect himself, let alone protect the children or your little brothers. That has to have a lasting effect on the little children of seeing their parents unable to protect them or even protect themselves. This must have a lot of impacts that are going to show later after this whole attack has started. They are going to see the effects in later generations, and the children even when they grow up.
And of course, like you just mentioned, this is a temporary ceasefire. There's only a couple hours left at the time of this broadcast. Israel and Hamas have not agreed to an extension. What do you think we can expect to see if they don't agree to an extension, and what would a sustainable ceasefire look like to you?
Well, it's awful that terms or conditions such as lifting the siege have to be up for negotiation, because those should be considered the humanitarian conditions, not political ones. I would understand if political conditions are up to negotiations, but lifting the siege, the mere idea of being subjected to the siege for 8 years and this topic not being brought up until after 2,000 people or 1,900 people, 1,900 people were killed is itself appalling. So why should it continue? People here believe that they have nothing to lose. Before the assault started, the life here was unbearable as itself, as it is, and the idea of going back to the same life, only minus 2,000 people and minus 10,000 injuries and 10,000 homes, 4 hospitals and 17 factories, and minus more than 40% unemployment. The idea is unbearable to the people, let alone the politicians. Leave the politicians aside. The people, the common man in Gaza, will not accept this idea.
The siege needs to end. Thank you so much. You're a hero. Please take care of yourself on the front lines there. Dr. Belal Dabour, Palestinian doctor in Gaza City. Really appreciate what you're doing.
Thanks.